Hi and welcome to today's video. Our today's session will actually be a bit interesting since we are now starting to learn the real deal. And so for today, we'll actually be covering lists. So before I start explaining, go ahead and open your code editor and create a file where we'll write our samples. And so for those who don't know what lists are, a list is like a variable. A list basically, sorry for that, a list basically stores multiple values. So you assign a variable to a list, and this list holds multiple numbers, multiple values. So how do you do this? Let me create my file, main.py. So to create your lists, first write your variable. In my case, I'll just call mine names. And so I've already created my variable. So to create your list, you need to add the square brackets. We've already created a list, but in our case, our list is empty since it doesn't have anything. We can actually add items to our list as we create it. So how do we do this? We could start by maybe adding words inside. So John, Amy, Dennis, and that's how we create. So in our case, we created a variable, and as we have created a list, and as we were creating this list, we added values inside. So on our previous video, actually discussed the various data types in Python programming. We ended up mentioning the strings, integers, Boolean. Boolean meaning true or false. Strings are like what we have written here, and integers are basically numbers. So as you can see in my list, all the values are strings. But does this mean that you're only supposed to use strings? Actually, no. You can actually use any data type. So what can you do? Okay, let me create another list, values. So I can create a list and maybe add an integer, maybe next add an string. For strings, it needs the quotation marks, maybe a boolean, false, and so on. So in our second example of a list, we ended up using the three data types, an integer, string, and Boolean, meaning that in a list, you're not only supposed to use one single data type. You can use any data type that you prefer. So after creating our list and assigning values, how do we access these values? So we will use this. Let me add other names. So we've created our list, and maybe let's add, I want 5 names. I've repeated that. Okay. James. So I only want 4 values. So we've already created our variable. So how do we access these values? So we'll use the print function, print. So basically print is used to provide an output for the viewer. So if we want to access the value, we'll go ahead and reference our list, which we assign to the variable name. Then use these square brackets. Now, inside the square brackets, we use something called an index. So by index, I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but by index is like you define a value based on where it is positioned. So in our case, we have 5 values: John, Amy, Dennis, James, Victor. So if we were to use index, we'll go ahead and start counting. So index are basically numbers. So we'll start counting. So here at John, this is 0. Remember, in programming, we also start from 0. Then this is 1. Then this is 2. Then this is 3. Then this is 4. So whenever you're using index, you're supposed to count from 0. And this is not only common in Python, but also in other programming languages. So let's say we want to output this name Amy. So I'll end up using the index 1, and let's run this. So let me run this. You can actually see it gave us the word aim. So one thing you need to note is that to access your value, you need the index, and we always start counting from 0 in index. So next, we're going to check if an item exists. Let's say you've already created a list and it has multiple values, but you actually need to cross-check whether a certain value exists. So I'll end up introducing a new concept known as if. So in Python, we have conditions. For example, in our case, we'll be using if. So you end up saying if, then give it a statement. So whether our program agrees to the statement or not is what determines what it will do next. That's a lot of theory. So let me be a bit practical. So let's say I'm looking for the word Dennis. So I'll go ahead and write if Dennis in names. So if this is the value you're looking for, and names is the value of our list. So this basically tells our program to check for a value called Dennis inside the list names. So then we'll say, then we'll print something. I want to print Dennis exists. So inside this condition, this is called an if condition. This line of code is only executed when we meet this condition, if the value Dennis exists. So in our case, the name Dennis already exists. So let's go ahead and run. See, you can see Dennis exists. So it ends up printing Dennis exists. So what happens when we delete Dennis? Or let's use another name. Let's say we use the word apple. So this checks whether the word apple exists inside this list. So let's run this. You can actually see it doesn't output anything. This is actually for the previous one, but this is what happened in our current one. It doesn't output anything since the condition was not met by our code. So aside from creating a list and checking whether an item exists, you can also change the value inside the list. So how do we do this? Let's say I want to change the value. I want to remove the value John and change. So note this. Indexing is actually a key concept in lists and other sectors. So I want to change this value John and maybe give it the value Ivy. So how do I do this? I'll go ahead and reference my list, which is names. Then the variable I used names. Then use the index. In our case, John is in the index 0. Then use an equal sign to assign a value. Then I'll go ahead and write the word Ivy. Then to check whether this works, we'll go ahead and print our list. Our list is names. You can actually see when we created this, the first value was John, but after making changes, the first value was Ivy, as you can see. So that's how we actually change the value. Depending on the name you want to change, the only thing you have to change is the index. If you want to change something, let's say we want to change the value James, I'll just come and use the index 3. And let's run this. And you can see in this case, the value James is what is changed to Ivy. So you can also use another method called the insert. So I'll go ahead and reference my variable. So names dot insert. So this function insert takes two values. Our first value is the index. As I told you, indexing is actually a key concept in programming. So in this case, we'll change the value 0 in our 0 index. And let's maybe change this to Eugene. So in our case, we're using two methods. We're using the insert and the index, but let me comment this out. So I only wanted to run this code. So if I run this, you can actually see we started by listing our index 0, which is the first position. Then the value is supposed to substitute it with, and as you can see, the value John changed to Eugene. Next, we'll cover adding an item. Next, we want to add an item. So how do we add an item? We've already created your list with let's say like 5 names, but we also want to add another name. So how do we do this? So you just go ahead and reference your list names dot. And this time we'll be using append. So append basically adds. Then you give the value you want to add. In our case, we'll maybe use, let's add Ivy. So by appending, we add the value Ivy, then you go ahead and print to see whether any changes have occurred. So as you can actually see, our first value had 5 values, while our last one had 6. So our first one had John, Amy, Dennis, James, Victor. It reached here, it only had this. But after using the append, it added a 6th value, which is Ivy. So that's how we add. So by using the value append, it adds your value to the last position, as you can see. Whereas in these other cases, using the insert and the index, you actually add it to the position you specified. But in append, we actually don't specify it. It only adds to the last position. So after adding, you can also remove an item inside the list. So how do we do this? We'll go ahead and reference our value name dot remove. So let's remove. Let me add. Let's remove John. Let's remove John. So I'll basically remove, then write our value, and we won't remove the word John. In your case, you can use any other value that you like to, but to remove an item, it needs to be inside the list. If not, it will actually bring up an error. As you can see, if I actually run it, it doesn't have the value John. When we were creating this list, it had 5 values, whereas here it has 4 values. And the first value John is what we remove by referencing the word John. So apart from this method, we also have another method of removing. So in our first method, we remove a value by specifying the value we want to remove. But in our second example, we remove the value as per according to the index, according to its position inside the list. So I'll go ahead and write names dot pop. Then after writing the pop, we write the index which we want to remove. So we'll still remove the same one John. And what did you say the index was? We said it's 0. So I'll go ahead and write names.pop 0, then run this. It should actually bring something similar to what we did on our previous. So to remove an item, you can either use remove or pop. To add an item, you can use append or insert. And after removing an item, we can also, in these two methods, we only remove one value at a time. But what if you wanted to remove all the values inside the list? How do you do this? So you just go ahead and write names. Names is the name of our list dot clear. So this basically removes everything inside our list. If we run this, it should actually bring an empty list. As you can see, an empty list, only 2 square brackets. And next, you can actually loop through a list. So what do we mean by looping? Putting aside the programming concept, when we say loop, it's basically repeating something over and over again. So let's say we want to get all the values inside our list. We'll use something known as the for loop. We'll use something known as the for loop. So basically this is used to loop, meaning that it repeats that process for a couple of times. So for I is just a random variable that you can think of. I know this is actually a new concept. I'll actually cover it in another video. So stay tuned. But let me explain a bit. For I in, then we reference our list names. Print I. So if I run this, let me explain. So when we write for I in names, we basically tell our program to go through each and every value inside our list and assign it to the variable I. Then inside here, we give the command we want to happen to these values. In our case, we only want to print. By printing, we want to get the output. So when we write for I in names, print I, we basically go through each and every value of our list, and after going through, we print those values. So if we run this, you can see it actually brings all those values: A, John, Amy, Dennis, James, Victor, and it prints this since we we did it comment is out print names. We can also do something known as sorting. Putting aside the programming concept, by sorting it basically means arranging something, putting something into order. In the programming context, in the list, so when we say sort, we basically mean we arrange the values in a systematic order. By systematic order, we could maybe say according to the alphabets, meaning from A to Z, maybe according to the integers from the smallest to the biggest. So how do we do this? So we'll go ahead and reference our list names dot sort. Before I run this, there's something you need to note. When carrying out the sort, you can only do this you can only do this when your list contains values of a specific data type. By specific, sorry, for saying specific, I mean for a single data type, meaning that all your values in that list should be of the same data type. Like in our case, all the values in our list are list. Let me write this. So something to note, all the values inside our list should be of the same data type. So let's go ahead. So can actually check the order. We will compare it to our previous output. So in our previous output, it started by John, then Amy, Dennis, James, finally Victor. But in this case, since this is a string, it basically follows the alphabetical order. It started with Amy, then Dennis, then James, John, and finally Victor. As you can see, it followed the alphabetical order of our first letters in each and every value. But what if we had integers? So let me create another list, numbers. We're using the square brackets, so 54, 68, 10, 89, 88. So what if we do this for our numbers? So I'll go ahead and write numbers dot sort. Then I'll print the numbers. Okay, before I sort, I think I should first of all print the numbers before sorting so that we can check out the difference. So it actually brings up two values. So our first list is the list without the sorting part, and our second is our list after we've sorted it out. So before sorting it out, by sorting it, we arrange it in the ascending order from the smallest to the largest. In our first case, it started with 54, 68, 10, 29, 88. But after sorting, it started with the smallest, which was 10, followed by 29, 54, 68, and finally 88. So to arrange this in order, to arrange items in a list in order, we basically use sort. And one thing to note is that for you to use sort, all the values inside that list should be of the same data type. And we mainly do this for strings and integers. I don't think it's applicable for all those other data types. So we've sorted it. Next, we want to reverse our list. Okay, so I'll use this same example. We ended up sorting our numbers, meaning we started from the smallest to the largest. But what we wanted to reverse is by reversing this, we will start by the largest to the smallest. How do we do this? So we'll go ahead. In my case, I'll still use this list number. So after sorting it out, meaning that it's arranged from the smallest to the largest, I want to reverse, meaning that the last value in our previous list will be the first value, that order. So I'll go ahead and write numbers dot reverse. So I want to print this before and after reversing. So let me run this. So you can actually see, remember you need these two brackets. So you can actually see in our first list, this is after sorting it out, meaning that it started with the smallest, in the ascending order from the smallest to the largest. But after reversing this, you can see that our last value in our previous list became our first. Our first list, we started by 10, 29, 54, 68, finally 88. But after reversing our list, we started with 88, which is the biggest, and ended with 10, which is the smallest. So aside from that, we can actually join two lists. By joining is basically add your list to another list. So how do we do this? Let me comment this out. So let's say I want to add names to numbers. So I'll go ahead and write numbers dot extend. Then the extend takes the value of a list or anything iterable. Don't worry about that hard word iterable, just use a list. So in our case, we have our other list, which is names. I'll go ahead and write our other value, our other list names. Note that you can't use any other data. You can't use any variable. You must use a list. So by writing this line of code, we basically tell our program to add the values of names to our list, to our numbers list. So let's print this. Yes, you can actually see it added these values, John, Amy, Dennis, James, Victor, to our numbers. And that's basically all we're going to cover for today. Thank you for staying tuned. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. I hope you understood these concepts. Feel free to comment and leave a like. Yes, and let's meet in the next video.